All right. So, fourth Q&A. We got Coach Vannessa, Coach Keith, and Cookie the dog. So let's start with a very common and good question. I'm doing my very first tournament and I'm very nervous. How do I calm my nerves?
It's a good one.
So I would say there's two options. One, you're just gonna have to eat it and do the tournament, because no matter, anytime you do something, for the first time, you're gonna be nervous. So your option is, if you can withstand it, to just go and see how you do. Some people won't perform well being nervous, some people do. So I would say get your first one out of the way and just kind of go for it. But option two, if you kind of know yourself and what calms you down, if you're nervous, most likely you probably need something to calm you down, or you might actually need something to maybe bring you up a little bit. So if you're nervous, I like to do music. I do regulation, so if I'm feeling a little nervous, I'll listen to some mellow music. If I feel like I'm a little too low, and I get nervous sometimes when I almost feel low, I'll listen to, hip hop music, something with a high beat to get myself together. Music is one good way I like. I would say, just get your first one out of the way, and then the second one, like when you're in the bullpen or before you're about to compete, use music to regulate yourself, get your mind off of it in some way. That's pretty much what I do. I'm not big on, nerves before the tournament, but I think a lot of people enjoy listening to music and they adjust it based on how nervous they feel and why they're nervous.
Yeah, I would say like everybody, well not everybody, but most people are very nervous in their first tournament. It's a very common thing. As I always say, you always get the same kind of two reactions when white belts do their first tournament. It's usually like wow, coach, that match was so quick, it happened so fast, and you're like, well, actually it was the same time as most of your matches in the room, but your nerves are you're so freaked out that by the time you calm yourself down in the match, there's very little time left. The other thing is, they're like, oh, coach, I was so tired. I don't know why I was so tired. I said, yeah, your heart's beating super fast. The anxiety's going really high. So I would say that one, you want to make sure that you're in pretty good shape before you do the tournament, to make sure that your conditioning will overcome some of that anxiety. And then I would say find yourself a good routine. Usually what I do, and not everybody's a little bit different, but like I was always very, very high anxiety when I was competing. And my very first match would always be like, Julius would always say, oh man, you look really sluggish in your first match. And you always took me like that one match to kind of wake up, and then the rest of the tournament was pretty good. Until I found a really good routine. And my routine basically was, I would do a really, really hard warm up, really hard, like harder than probably we even do in the room. And then I would do that like an hour before. And then I would go, put some super relaxing music on, put a hoodie on, and go sleep in the bleachers for 30 minutes or whatever. It's cool, super relaxing, calm, like spa music. And then right before I'm ready to go, right before I'm being called, I do a really fast warm up, and then go out there, smack myself a little bit, and wake myself. Get the dog hyper, but wake myself up and just go out there. And once I kind of had that routine that I did every day, I was very calm. I got used to, and I don't think that it was 100% actually what my routine was. I think that actually a lot of it was more just having a routine.
I would say, sorry.
Yeah, so I would just say just having a routine, because I know other guys that literally they just have to get really, really amped up, and some of the guys will be in there smacking each other in the face and going crazy and going out there and they're listening to really hype music. For me, that would make me more anxiety. So you got to find out what the routine that works for you, and then just sticking to it and having a good routine, I think will really, really help you get over that anxiety.
But the question was, what do you do in their first tournament? So
Right.
They don't know if they're going to go in.
Yeah, so I would say the same thing. Start with something, find out what you like, kind of like what Coach Vannessa said. I would say for sure do a warm-up, whether it's like I do a really hard one first and then a light one right before, or just do one period, right? Just do a warm-up. I would say don't watch a whole lot of matches before you're ready to go, because you're going to psych yourself out watching. So just keep your mind off of it, hang out with your friends, keep your mind in a more calm place, or just go by yourself and just listen to some music, do the warm-up, relax until it's your turn to go. And, and like I said, you're never going to be 100% over it that first time, But usually by after you get that first match or two in, you're like, okay, we're just doing what we're doing in the room, and then you're a lot calmer.
Yeah, I say prep work even way before. I know we have one competitor here. He starts his prep a week in advance, and he's like, he limits his cell phone usage, so he limits the amount he's going on the internet. I think he deletes his Facebook, and like he deletes his social media, so he's not on that as much, so he's not tempted to scout people or look anyone up. He just limits his usage. He goes more into like reading at night before bed and making sure he's really ready and really preparing. So another thing is making sure that you're well prepared, whether it be technically, physically, emotionally, just preparing yourself the best of your ability. I think that also helps nerves. If you feel confident in yourself and your skills and you feel like you put in a good training week, your nerves are going to be a little less. But there's just a lot of prep work, but my biggest thing is just go into it and, you know, do your first match, get it out of the way. You might have to eat it, and like what Coach Keith said, you can start early, maybe start one routine, see if it worked for you. If it didn't, and start to change it around. But my biggest thing is you're just gonna have to get it out of the way.
First tournament's not even jiu-jitsu. The first tournament is just getting out there, and then after that, then you can start worrying about performance and technique and all that kind of stuff. The first tournament, the only time that the first tournament is actually the about jiu-jitsu is if you wrestled or you did another combat sport before, and then you sort of understand what it feels like. But the important thing is just to get out there.
And don't put any extra stress on yourself, like what are other people thinking, what the coaches think. Trust me, the coaches, we all are just like, we expect you to be a little bit nervous. We expect you to like just get out there and just have fun and try to do the best you can and just, you know, get through it. There's nobody putting any extra stress on you. A lot of times we internalize and we think a lot of things are, you know, what about this? And just, you know, you just do your best, stay calm, and don't worry. Nobody's gonna think less of you if you win, or more of you win, or less if you lose. It's just, you know, it's just a tournament. And in jiu-jitsu, we have the benefit of nobody's paying attention to records or anything like that. It's literally like you're gonna do thousands of matches over the course of your jiu-jitsu where you win a lot of them, you lose a lot of them, and eventually you're just like, it's just another day, just training and getting better at jiu-jitsu.
Okay. Question 2, how does my training change when I decide to compete?
Wait, say that one more time.
How does my training change when I decide to compete? I'm assuming this is still in relation to first tournament.
Okay. Yeah, so I would say that for one, you want to try to make sure that you're in pretty good shape. You don't want the tournament to be about, you know, just getting hustled or whatever, or not being able to do anything because you literally were just physically out of shape. So I would say you should start pretty early. Jiu-jitsu, we don't really do a lot of weight cutting, so you want to kind of walk around at the weight that you want to compete at, you know, within a few pounds for sure. So you want to, you know, make sure your diet's right. You want to make sure you're in shape, and that's pretty much it. I mean, I'm a fan of competing pretty early on in your jiu-jitsu career and getting those matches out of the way early. So I think that most important thing is just, like I said, eating right, getting your sleep right, try to limit the stressors that you have, and just make it about having fun.
Should you train more?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on how much you're training anyway, right? If you're training a ton, then I would say, you know, you're probably training enough. If you're only training 1 or 2 days a week, then for sure I think that you should train as much as you possibly can to get ready for it. And I would stay at least a couple months out for sure.
So let's say that, what would you say a person should train before their first tournament? Like a baseline, what's the minimum?
I don't know. I think that if you're going to be competing, you should be training at least 3 days a week, if not more. Yeah. I would say if you're only training 1 or 2 days a week, unless you've been training for like a really long period of time, but like if you're pretty new to the sport, assuming that you just really started, I would say that you should be training at least 3, if not more, times a week, and doing conditioning at least 2 or 3 times a week as well.
I think the conditioning and the training more part is extra important for the first tournament because you're going to be nervous. I think it's important because you're gonna fatigue generally sooner because you're like high anxiety and you're nervous. So I I think it's important to try to get in as good shape as possible.
Right.
First.
I would agree.
Do you have anything?
That's along with the first part. I guess it depends. So I'll address two things. You guys addressed it was good, first time competitor, where now you've committed to a little bit of a higher level. So the first stage, I would say, is just fundamentals, getting your fundamentals right, getting your phase belt. Once you're a phase belt, we would consider you kind of a casual. So you're if you're a casual jiu-jitsu practitioner, no problem. That's fine. You can come in and you can come here and you can learn the martial art for fun or for your leisure. Then the next level would be to be a competitor. So now, as you start to commit to higher and higher levels within the sport, your training and your mentality has to also increase, as far as now you've committed to something. So now you have to commit. You've in your mind committed to competing, and that means now you commit to something else. So maybe you're super busy, but can you get in 3 days of sprints outside? That's something extra. If that's a little you can do, that's something. Maybe you go outside for a run before practice. That's something. Eating right in general just should be on everyone's list, whether you're a competitor or not. Yeah. So that's something. If you're not eating right and you're trying to compete, that's something that really has to be fixed. And that's, I think, less effort than something else. So the eating right is very important, because if you're not eating right, you're not gonna be able to train at your best, and you're not gonna be able to compete at your best. And then your results or your potential, it might be blurry, because now you haven't taken care of yourself in the way that you need to. And then the training more. If you can't train more and you want to compete, at least just training with more focus. So the coaches always say take notes, film study when you have free time, just these extra things that you can do. We've had successful competitors that haven't trained like 6 days a week, 2 times a day, 3 days strength and conditioning. And as long as you start to commit yourself to more and more, just even small steps. Once you decide to compete, you don't have to go from 3 days to 6 days a week. Now, no strength conditioning, 3 days of strength conditioning. Now you're eating whatever you want, and now you have like a 1,000 limit calories. It's as long as you start to just commit to something. So if you're a competitor, what's the next step? What's something you can add? Like I said, if you run the loop outside, that's something extra that will help you a little bit. You should already be eating right. If you can, fit in maybe 15-30 minutes of film study. Watch 2 black belt matches. That's 20 minutes, maybe 30. Watch some instructionals that you see. Maybe you can pick up small things. Ask your coaches questions. Take notes. But it's basically just take it a little more serious in the way that you can. So if you can do 6 days a week, you can do strength conditioning, you can do all these things, do it. But if you can't, realistically see what you can commit to and then do it. And also develop a routine. Like you said, routines are big. As inconsistency. If you're inconsistent, like you do 2 days of strength conditioning this week and 1 the next week and then none the week after, and you're film studying for 2 hours the next week, but you didn't do it this week, it's just inconsistent. So your results, again, your potential is going to be blurry. So just consistent, find a routine that you can commit to now that's more than what you were doing, and then just stay consistent with it. And it's gonna help you out in the long run. Even still, that's good for if you're coming in here just a casual jiu-jitsu practitioner. That's something that's good too, because it's gonna get you to the level of mastery a little bit faster.
When I started jiu-jitsu, just from me personally, I know everybody's different. I actually literally could only train 3 days a week. It was the absolute most that I could train at that time, and then clearly I freed up a lot of time and started competing and training a lot. But in the beginning, like, I didn't even want to compete. I was like super nervous. I was super out of shape, and so I was only training 3 days a week. And then it was probably only a couple months in, I was like, I got caught that jiu-jitsu bug, and I started really wanting to compete. And I did my first tournament after only a few months, and I had success only training 3 days a week. But I had a lot more success when I started training more. So I wouldn't kind of make that the thing where, like, if you absolutely can't but you really want to compete, like, yeah, I mean, clearly you can just, whenever you feel like you're ready, you can do it. But if you want to give yourself the best chance, of having good success, I would say for sure, you want to train, the more the better, right? And the more the better, and the more the better, and the more conditioning you can do it, for sure. Because I was also doing conditioning. Even though I could only train 3 days a week, I was finding that time to do, running and doing circuit training and trying to stay in shape. And that's, I think that's super important.
Okay. Third question, which you sort of touched upon, but let's try to stay focused on the questions instead of following the whole subject. When should I compete for the first time? Sorry, we gotta hold this dog. This dog is running wild now.
When should I compete for the first time? I mean, that's a good question, and I guess we did kind of touch loosely on it in pieces. I think that it's going to be different for everyone a little bit, but I think that you don't want to go too soon to where you're just going to get, obliterated, right? Because nobody wants to have a bad first experience, right? But at the same time, you don't want to wait until you're an upper belt to do your first tournament and then be nervous in your first tournament, but now the guys are really good at jiu-jitsu. So I would say, in my mind, I think that you should compete. I know this is a little bit vague, but in my mind, you should compete pretty early on, but not until you're ready. So don't make anybody kind of force you when you don't really feel like you're ready to do it. I would say try to get in shape first, focus on learning fundamentals, getting to that first few stages in your jiu-jitsu progression, what we call a phase belt, but other schools are a little bit different. And really focus on learning a little bit of jiu-jitsu, having a system before you go out there, so that you want to make sure that you are able to do or have something that you are going to try to do. So if you're just going out there blindly and you're just like, oh, I know some jiu-jitsu and doing random stuff, the other guy's probably going to be on you early because he's trying to force his will, he's trying to force his game plan on you. So I would say have a game plan and drill that game plan enough to where it's a little bit, instinctive. So whether it's takedowns through passing, or whether it's guard and a sweep game or guard and submission game, have something in mind that you can always go back to in the match. Again, that first tournament, it's all going to go pretty much out the window anyway, your first match. But it's good because maybe you get past that first match and then the second match, and now you start really being able to start having something to focus on, even if you don't have a variety of jiu-jitsu. So to shorten that up a little bit, I would say worry about being in shape, worry about getting to that first tier, what we call phase belt of jiu-jitsu, having something that you can fall back on, and then having a game plan. And once you have those things and you feel confident you're ready, I think that you should compete as early as possible after that point.
I'll make that even simpler. For kids, once you hit the AP program, compete. If you're an adult, once you hit phase belt, compete whenever you feel like you're ready. Because people always come to us and say, you think I'm ready to compete? And I'll never say no. If a kid wants to compete and they're an AP, and an adult wants to compete and they're a phase belt, I don't think anyone would say no. And as far as, waiting too long, I don't think there's really any specifically waiting too long. As long as you feel like you're progressing well enough, I think you can compete at your first time as a purple belt if you are actually a purple belt and you have been paying attention in practice. So I would say whenever, after you hit that minimum rank, whenever you want. Really, that's just my opinion.
I think that you should compete as soon as you can, as long as it doesn't negatively affect your future jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And so there's unlike MMA or striking where they count your record, jiu-jitsu doesn't really care about that. So for me, the only thing that would stop a person from competing in jiu-jitsu, other than being out of shape, is that they lose a lot of self-confidence because they have a rough first tournament. So if you can contextualize and have a good mindset that, hey, this is my first tournament, I might lose, or I'm going to get better from this point on, then I think that you should just compete as soon as you can, as long as you're a phase belt. And I think that's a very important point what Keith brought up, which is you have to have a way to win. If you don't have a way to win, I don't think that you should compete yet. But even if you have just a very singular way to win, then I think you should just go in, compete. You're not going to lose your confidence, right? So then you get the first tournament out of the way, and then you have a really good baseline for future tournaments. Cool.
Yep.
Next question. I'm sparring and about to run into another group. Who moves?
First you go by belt, so lower belts will move for upper belts. And then usually for me, what I've done that's been safe is if we're the same belt rank, I'll look at weight Even me just being younger, I sometimes even look at age. Like I will move for a black belt who was older than me, and when I was a brown belt, I would move for a brown belt who I felt was older than me, just out of respect. But I think it goes belt rank, then size, and then if you want to get very specific, go by age. And in general too, if you know.
Highest rank,
rank, yeah.
not belt rank. So like it's not like, oh, it's 2 blue belts, that's equal to a purple belt and a white belt.
Whoever's in the group is the highest. Whoever in the partnership, whoever is the highest belt, you go by that. So if it's a purple and a white belt, the 2 blue belts should move for them. So either part, belt ranks, whoever's the highest ranking is the one that counts. And then after that, if you guys are the exact same belt rank, like a blue and a purple and a blue and a purple, I would say the smaller people should move, in my opinion. And then even after that, I like to just move in general, especially if I'm not in the middle of something crazy, like I'm not in the middle of a submission. I think it's just safe to move out of respect anyway. In general, I'm not super big on like hitting people and making them move for me, unless I'm in the middle of like a serious transition that I need to finish. But
right, like we do have, you know, the rule set to where, you know, you're gonna move for the upper belt. Like generally speaking, especially most of the upper belts, like you know, use a little common sense or common courtesy. If I'm in closed guard and somebody's, you know, in open guard and they're running around, or in a submission, I might just get up and move. And really, but there are some people that are a little bit more stubborn, and we usually just go by that thing. The one caveat that I do in my classes is I say I don't really go by belt rank if you're on the feet and the people next to you are on the ground, because the people on the ground can't move fast enough to get out of your way if you're like doing takedowns. So I say, if you're doing takedowns, watch the people that are on the ground, because they can't move fast enough. And then aside from that, that's just safety issue. And then aside from that, we go by, you know, belt rank. If it's even, you know, in highest rank, then if there's 2 blue belts and a blue belt and a white belt, the blue belt and white belt would move. And then if it's completely even, you know, guys, you know, use your best judgment and be courteous. And, you know, you could say the guys are bigger, or like she said, she likes to move for older people, or whatever the case is. But, you know, if you're respectful and you know, use common courtesy, I think this is usually not super issue. Don't make the coaches have to get involved, but, you know, just move.
I mean, if the coaches do get involved, then, you know, no matter what the rank is, like if you tell me to move for a group of blue belts, I'm gonna move. I say with the kids sometimes, I've told an upper belt group to move because a lower belt group wasn't in transition, and I've had the child argue me like, oh, I'm a yellow belt, and I was like, I don't care, I'm a brown belt, you need to move. So I've had a couple of situations like that where if a coach is telling you to move, regardless of what belt rank you are, you have to move at that point, because they probably see something that you don't, or they think that transition that's happening right now is harder to stop than you just getting up really fast and moving.
Right.
Question: how do I know the difference between a challenging training partner and a dangerous training partner?
Ooh, I like this one.
Moving, go ahead.
Okay, so for challenging, I pretty much, me personally, I think I don't have any dangerous training partners. I think as far as challenging, it's interesting because, I mean, dangerous right away is if this person is injuring you or even just hurting you a little bit too much, like hurting to the point where you guys have to stop and you can't finish the roll. If that is happening, if they're doing any type of illegal techniques, if you feel like they're putting you in dangerous positions, if you feel like they're not really being courteous as far as their self-control, then that's dangerous. Challenging is just someone who you might be going back and forth with, who might be beating you, but beating you with control. Things like that. I feel like deep down people know, and they kind of know who's a challenging partner for them and who's dangerous. But I'm assuming that they're asking this for a specific clarification. So just to make it simple, dangerous is someone who, and usually everyone will know who a dangerous person is. It's not just one, unless they're specifically targeting you, but it's someone who is just doing a string of things that are unsafe, illegal techniques. They're cranking submissions, they're hurting you, even injuring you a little too much, and there's a problem. A challenging person is someone who you're not necessarily getting. They could still hurt you just because it's a combat sport, but it's not anything that's, you know, ridiculous. Yeah, they're not being reckless.
I think there's another.
It's a closer match, and it's one that you kind of don't want to do just because it's a tough match for you, but you're not actually getting hurt. You're not put in any dangerous positions. It's just a tough match, but that person generally isn't hurting you. They're just besting you, or it's a really close match to where it's like every time you go with that person, I think everyone has that one person that they go with that they know it's going to be a battle.
To me, dangerous is not just intent of the other person. Some people they're just uncontrolled, especially because they're not technically proficient enough.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If they're putting you in positions, not like, I didn't mean like they're specifically bigger and putting you in positions, but as far as if you feel like the role is always going into some sort of unsafe, like any illegal techniques they don't know, or any type of unsafe boundary.
Now, I think that there's a lot of white and blue belts who are for lack of a better word, clumsy.
Right.
So
That's
they're
what I was
actually
gonna say.
dangerous.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's like a lot of people, like, especially, I guess are we asking how you identify these people, or how do you feel, like, how do I know if what they did to you was dangerous? Like, I guess they're a little bit different. So generally speaking, the higher the belt, the less dangerous they are going to be, because they've been doing it a long enough time to know how to be safe with you. There are a lot of white belts and blue belts, and it's not intentional. I really don't think that most of the time, I would say the vast majority of the time, it's not intentional. But they're not aware of their body and how their body moves yet. So you get elbowed incidentally, you get kneed in the face incidentally, and it's reckless. Then there's other times on the feet, especially, you get a lot of stuff where, like, the guys will do that thing where they sit on your knee. So, like, there's a lot of, it's because they're doing the technique wrong. And then there's other people that are literally just because, they're clumsy, like you said. They just don't have control of their body yet, and it takes time. So, that happens. But I always like to try to say, like, I try to assume the best in people, and I assume that it's not on purpose, so I don't get mad at them. But if somebody is being reckless and you are getting injured or getting potentially injured, then yeah, you find a different partner.
That's what I think. I mean, that's kind of what I meant to say, but I didn't say it right. And well, that's what I meant. Like, usually people know who the dangerous or clumsy people are. We used to call it Murder Inc. Because they don't mean to do it. They're just, that you're getting put in awkward positions, or like, yeah, that's a good point. You're getting striked, which, I mean, I've been kicked in the face a bunch of times. I don't think, even when I've been kicked in the face, I actually don't think I've been kicked in the face by someone who I perceive as dangerous. Right. It's just, it just happens. But even if you're getting, accidentally kicked or elbowed, and me and Lakita too, like, it's funny, anytime we're rolling, I'll punch her in the face by accident, and then, like, 3 minutes later, she'll do it back to me. It's just, but I don't see her as dangerous. I just see in the intensity of the match, things like that. Yeah, things like that will just happen. So I definitely don't think that it's usually intentional,
right?
For sure. But it's just, if you feel like you're being put in unsafe positions constantly, not being put, or you're just ending up in unsafe positions, or you feel in danger.
Right. And generally, the coaches kind of recognize these things, and we will try to partner the people accordingly. So you want to put the unsafe people with people that can kind of control them and help them get better. So, like, but sometimes it does squeak by, but generally the coaches try to keep an eye on those kinds of things. And if you have an issue, I would definitely say, bring it up to the coach, and the coach will.
So let's talk about what percentage of each belt do you consider to be dangerous? So just not outside of Crazy 88. We're talking Crazy 88 only, their belts. What percentage of the black belts do you consider to be dangerous?
Zero. I don't think any.
Okay. What percentage of the brown belts do you consider to be dangerous?
Here, 0.
What percentage of the purple belts do you consider to be dangerous?
A little bit higher.
What do you
maybe
think?
25.
Yeah, maybe 25%.
We don't have that many now currently, but I would say within like the last year, people who have been purple belts, I would say about 25%.
Okay. What percentage of blue belts do you think are dangerous?
I feel like we're just doubling it almost.
Yeah, it's got a lot higher.
40?
Not only, I wouldn't even say it's half. I would say, but
Maybe like 30 to 40.
30%.
Okay. And what percentage of phase belts do you think are dangerous?
Now we're getting into that probably 50% range.
And what percentage of white belts are dangerous?
All of them.
Yeah, I would say most white belts are close to 100%.
Unless, like, it depends. I feel like you kind of have two. You have two different white belts, or you even have three. You have the first section is the people who have experience with a combat sport, like wrestling, the judo, or just any sport in general, and they have body control. Then you have another group the second group is just the, like, limp, flimsy white belts that aren't dangerous. They just don't know what they're doing, so they're just chilling.
But they're dangerous to themselves.
It depends on who they go with.
Sure.
That's true. Yeah, it depends on who they go with.
I've going with them. I've had to let go of just grips and everything completely sometimes because they'll flip in a way that blows their own knee out. You're actively protecting them from hurting themselves. So yeah, for sure, because they haven't learned how to move their body yet. So
you have that third group that is the spazzy. They come in really tense, and because it's not a bad thing. I would say that those are the 3 sections, and I think we would get more of like the spazzy, just tense, not knowing what to do, but they're trying. Those kind of white belts.
Yeah.
That's why we actually, if you go to our fundamentals class, we don't do live sparring across all positions. We only do positional in the first thing, just because the white belt is the most dangerous belt. The highest injury rate, both to themselves and to other people, occurs at white belt. So you have to be very careful because it's not intentional, just incompetent.
Yeah.
Right. Last question, and maybe the most interesting question. When is it okay to disagree with the coach?
So you're saying when? Could we break it into 2? So when being like what occurs, and then 2 is how you do it, right? So if we're gonna say with what, I would say if you have a disagreement, a disagreement of technique, I don't think it's wrong to politely ask a question in the room. But I know people that they think they're politely asking, but they're not. So I say any disagreements with the coach is always best to do afterwards, one-on-one, just to really have a conversation. But if you're talking, that's good for technique. And then disagreements, I guess, if you like to talk to us at the end of practice, and if anyone would have a disagreement with that, again, I don't think it's a problem to disagree because we're humans. I think the best way to bring it up would be after, one-on-one, just be like, hey, what did you mean by that? Or, I might disagree with this, and explain why. And it's always best to do it politely, because if you don't, it just kind of creates a tension between, you and the coach. And
yeah, I think that, it's important to kind of make distinctions along the way, because like when, how, and what, right? So like you clearly, if the coach is in the middle of teaching a technique, you're not going to yell like showing, the coach is showing a triangle, you don't want to yell out in the middle of class, like, are you going to show the defense for that? Like, what if they do this or whatever, or challenge them on things. Like, man, being a little bit calmed down, right? Because I say that because that has happened. So, you want to take it to, what are we talking about? Like, are you saying like you saw a different version of that technique, or like, hey, coach, I saw somebody use this grip instead of that grip. Like, I think that's perfectly okay. Some people do not like. I know people that literally get offended when people ask questions like they're being challenged on the thing or why. But I don't find that at all, because some people learn by literally just doing and emulating what someone else is doing. But other people, they need to know the why. So, and it helps them get better at jiu-jitsu. So if people ask me questions like why not this grip or that grip, I do my best to explain what the differences are and why we're doing it a certain way or why we're not doing it a certain way. And like, maybe we're doing it this way because it's going to set up a different set of techniques, and the other way is not wrong at all. So, but the person doesn't know that. So I think that's good. You like to ask questions, as long as you're always being, respectful and polite. So I guess I'm not sure what the student is asking specifically, like what they're challenging the coach on. When is it okay? Really, I think it really just depends on what and how you go about it. If it's something that you think the coach is not going to be too happy about, then maybe you should talk to the coach off the class and not in front of everybody and make it some kind of challenging thing. I don't know. I don't really know exactly what the student is.
I mean, we could say like, when is it not okay? So I would say, just in general, just the rule of communication is you never want to be blunt and rude anytime you ask. A lot of the times when I teach the kids, sometimes I will straight up be wrong about something, or I'll say something wrong, or every so often I'll yell at a kid for something, but I realize that they weren't doing what they were like. They were in the right, and that's happened a lot. And if the kids correct me politely, I'm okay with it. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, yeah, you're right. Go ahead and keep going. But if, the kids like to be snappy and they're like, oh, this is my chance. I was right and Coach Vannessa was wrong, and they stand up, because we've had that happen. They stand up and they yell, you're wrong, and then push-ups. I don't care if who was right in the situation. That's not how you handle it. So
let's give some examples of when there was a disagreement that you thought was appropriate, and an example of a disagreement that was appropriate. So I'll give one. So a long time ago, I was teaching an arm triangle, and we had a visiting, I think a blue belt or a white belt. And at the time I was either a purple belt or a brown belt. And in the middle of the demonstration to the class, the blue belt says, well, aren't you gonna show the defense? So he was literally asking if I knew that defense.
Yes.
Like that special technique to defend the arm triangle, was I going to show that to the class? And that was inappropriate simply because I'm in the middle of teaching an arm triangle. I'm not in the middle of teaching an arm triangle defense, and why does it have to be yelled out in the middle of the class, right? It's somewhat offensive as also like, was that like a gotcha or something? Like, you didn't even know that if you do a telephone to your ear, it can stop an arm triangle? Like, I don't know what the intention of that was, but it was very disruptive to the class and inappropriate. An example of a disagreement that is appropriate, well, I'll give two examples. One example I would say is if you're at a competition and the coach calls for a particular game plan, and you feel that another game plan is better, I think that's okay to have a disagreement with the coach and have a conversation about what game plan is appropriate. Because sometimes, like, the coach doesn't know. Maybe the coach is calling for a particular play, and and that play requires a lot of physical exertion, and maybe you just are exhausted. So you're like, coach, I don't really like that game plan. I think I'm gonna need this for this next match, just because I'm impaired at this time. And the coach is not gonna know if you're impaired. The coach might think, yeah, you're gonna be fine. You're gonna be okay. Like, sometimes the athlete is right, and sometimes the coach is right.
And that happened with us at 2017 Worlds, where the game plan for all the other matches was to stay on top. And then me in my head, I was like, no, I'm gonna do close guard for the finals. And it ended up working. And I remember you specifically said that you didn't think that was a great idea, but it was so late, and this was match 5, and it was the finals, that you just kind of let me. I think we had a quick conversation right before the match about it, and you didn't. After I said close guard, you didn't really see. You were like, okay, and that was it, and it ended up going okay. But even in that moment, I wasn't disrespectful. I wasn't like, no, I'm gonna do the close guard just because I want to do it. I was like, I think I want to do close guard for this match, and it was fine.
I mean, like, when Ty's final was like that too. When Ty won the Worlds at purple belt, he was on top for all the other matches, and in the finals, he was like, hey, he asked me, like, which you do, and I said, I don't know, whatever you want, because in the finals, you have to be confident. And then in that match, Ty pulled guard, even though he played top for all the other matches, and he ended up winning the Worlds. But so that's an example of a disagreement that I think is fine. And then another one, I don't really count this as a disagreement, but a quote disagreement that I think is also okay is sometimes you have athletes and coaches, they feel that they perform better under certain situations or certain coaching styles. So there are athletes who they don't like very specific coaching, right? And as long as it's true that their performance is the same under two styles of coaching, let's say very specific versus just positive in general, right? And you say, if Keith came to me and said, Coach, you're giving me really specific advice when I go out there, but honestly, I think that I do better when you're just general and positive, like, hey, go Keith, great job, you're doing great, then I'll say, okay. And then I look at the results and I say, actually, that's true, then guess what? I'll change how I speak to Keith at the tournament and give him more positive advice. So I would say those are two examples for me that was good, okay disagreement, and then one that's not bad.
So like A not okay one for me, I remember there was a purple belt that came from another school that had transferred over to us, and she was doing a technique, and I perceived the way that she was doing the technique as going to get her into trouble. So I said, hey, I wouldn't put my foot in this position because, and she immediately cut me off in the middle of because and said, such and such showed it to me, blah, blah, blah. He's a black belt, and I think I was a brown belt at the time. He's a black belt, and he told me to do it this way. And I said, okay. I started to walk away. And she was like, no, tell me what the thing was. I said, no. Such and such told you to do that. He's a black belt. You keep doing it his way. And then I believe that when she tried to do it live, she got her back taken. I said, that's exactly what I was talking about. You didn't want me to tell you. So it was very inappropriate, the way that it was brought up. If she had said, or just listened to what I was saying, be like, oh, I see what you're saying. Someone had showed me to do it this way, and because, and if she had a reason why, I would have listened to it. And that would have been a more appropriate way to handle the same exact situation, right? Because there are many variations, and as long as you understand the whys of each variation, then sometimes they could be applicable. But in some very specific situations, the coach, I could have even been wrong, right? But in that situation, I ended up being right. But you know, just because there's two coaches telling you two different ways doesn't mean they're right, doesn't mean they're wrong. Okay, so like, but there's a right way to handle that situation or a wrong way to handle that situation. And the way that she cut me off and told me and then appealed to the higher authority, I said, okay, all right. You know, and I thought that was very disrespectful.
What's a positive one?
A positive one? Well, there's many times where I was teaching like a very similar thing, like teaching, I don't know, college sleeve or something, and you know, they were like, they'll wait, I'll show the technique, and then when I'm walking the room, they'll call me over and say, I don't know, Julius had showed us to do this, and you're showing to do this. Is there a reason why? And then I'm like, yes, the reason that Julius was showing this is because we're doing this. The reason I'm showing this is because we're going to set something else up off of this separate grip, and he's going to switch to this because of this. And that's completely appropriate.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, for the kids, they're almost both the same situations, and just in the way, sometimes we split the classes a lot, so sometimes I'm running to maybe 2, possibly 3 different groups, having them teach things. And I remember there was an advanced group in the corner, and I went to go with the little kids to make sure that they're okay, and then I came back and I was like, whoa, why are you guys doing that? And they're like, oh, you just told us to do it. And I was like, oh, okay, you're right. And that, I thought that was okay. They kind of just like, they're politely like, oh, this is what you had told us to do. Like I switched the technique for them right before I left. Because, you know, coaches, if the classicality, you're running around, you don't remember, and they're politely like, oh, this is what you just showed us and told us to do. And I was like, oh, that's totally okay. And at that point, at the end, it was fine because, you know, I apologized. I said, oh, you're right, I'm sorry, and I kind of walked away. There's been situations where that has happened, or you know, a kid did a grip that I thought was wrong, and it ended up being okay, and they're like, yeah, I told you I was doing it right, and that's inappropriate because, one, they're a child, and at no point, even just, you know, adults talking to each other shouldn't be rude like that, but I thought that was completely inappropriate, and I ended up being wrong, but I didn't like the way that the child had brought it up to me. You stood up, pointed to me, and said, well, I see you were wrong, and so I immediately made him do push-ups, because regardless of if you're right or wrong, there's a right and wrong way to handle just doing that. So I remember I made him do push-ups, and then he was polite pretty much for the most part after that. So it's just mostly just how you address the disagreement and how you approach it is the biggest part.
Cool. What subject matter do you feel that is okay to disagree on? Because we talked a little bit about this yesterday with a different group, and somebody was saying that I think it was in relation to one of the questions we're going to ask later, but I think it relates to this as well. Something like, do you think that it's okay for them to disagree about something like, well, I'm training hard enough, and you think they're not training hard enough. So how would you, is it okay or not okay to disagree about sort of the macro assessments of training?
I feel like if you have a reason, because I feel like you and I have had a lot of these conversations where, you know, we'll have an end of the year review, and I remember you said, I think you can train a little bit more. You were inconsistent. I was like, yeah, I feel like I have been inconsistent, but then I had kind of talked about, you know, what was going on that year, why I was missing, and I wasn't just going home because I was tired. There was reasons for it. And I'm not saying to make an excuse, but I had the reasons, and I still admitted, like, yes, I for sure could have trained more, and I agree. But then sometimes you do have situations where the person is just being lazy, they're going out, and it depends on the level of the commitment of the athlete. If the athlete says they want to be in the UFC, they want to be a world champion, you know, there's a level of commitment there that you've gone and said to people. But I think it's, again, with the as long as there's a conversation and everything is brought up politely and you have your reasons, then that one's a little bit more difficult, just because
I've actually been, so I would say that generally speaking, if the coach tells you he doesn't think you're training hard enough, generally speaking, you're not. Yeah. However, I have been wrong, because we have these meetings that we do with our athletes, and we bring them in every so many months, whatever, and touch base with them. There was one athlete that's very specific that I remember that I was like, man, you're just not training hard enough. And we went through his schedule, and I was like, dang, this guy's training a lot. I was like, it was completely wrong. So it does happen, but it was done in a very appropriate way. He was like, coach, and like we sat down and we talked, and he like went through all his stuff, and I was like, okay. So what actually was the issue wasn't that he wasn't training enough, he just wasn't doing the right training. So we just adjusted what he was doing, and it ended up being great. But generally speaking, if the coach is like, man, like generally I feel like that comes up more in the I want to do X, but you don't want me to do X. And like I feel like that maybe that happens a little bit more on the MMA side and stuff, but like where they're like, man, I want to do a fight. Like, man, you're not even coming in training. Like, I think I trained hard enough to do the MMA. And you're like, listen, that talk usually is going to be like, especially when there's striking involved, that coach wants you to be like, you have a chance of being injured. Seriously. So like the coach is not saying it, he's not doing it because he's trying to be a jerk. He's doing it because, you know, he wants you to have success in what you're doing and not get injured.
There's like 1% of cases where you could disagree, but you have to have your reasoning, and it has to be something where, I mean, again, you sit down with the coach and you really talk about it, and you decide, you know, like I remember we sat down and there was something that I had to eliminate. I remember I wasn't getting a whole lot of sleep, so I was missing some of the night practice, I was tired, and so the adjustment was, let's take it easy on strength conditioning, go back to just regular night training for now, because I remember I was in school teaching the kids, and all that was a lot during the day, so we just adjusted it into where I didn't necessarily disagree, but I think we politely discussed it, and it was just calls for an adjustment. And then I remember I wasn't really missing night classes anymore after that.
So I would say that to answer the question, when is it appropriate to challenge the coach on that? Man, I say first, when and where are you doing it? If you're doing it in the middle of class, you're going to make the coach mad because he's going to feel like you're challenging him and disrespecting him. If you're taking him off to the side, you're like, coach. And then the two, I would say, come prepared to make your argument in a very cohesive way, right? You better have it like, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing. This is when I can train, right? And you have it laid out, and the coach is going to go over it with you, and he's going to explain why you need to do more of this or less of that, or you know what I mean? So like, the coach can break it down for you in a very plain way, but you have to have, I would be saying, come prepared to have that talk, and do not approach that with an attitude. Like I would say, man, if you come at the coach hard, I know a lot of coaches, and I know that they're gonna be like, whoa. I don't mean that if you make this standoffish thing. Don't make it a standoffish thing. Just make it a very, this is what I'm doing, what would you like me to do, right? How can I make it better? How can I train more? This is my schedule, this is when I can train, this is where I can fit in time for tape study, whatever, and then the coach is gonna break it down for you, and he's gonna, you know, they will help you make a really good plan. You know, like I said, when my student came in on that meeting, and I was like, wow, like, I had completely misread the thing. I had to really readjust the athlete's training. And I was like, okay. So, but there was no tension between us in that thing. That thing was like very smooth. Like we weren't mad. I wasn't coming at him. He wasn't coming at me. And I think that's a very appropriate way to handle that.
I think I like the story that Sebastian told us yesterday. So I think it relates to this, and it's about coming to a meeting and being prepared. So in Sebastian's side, he was telling us a story, and Sebastian doesn't like switching stances in striking, even though that's sort of popular in MMA. And his logic is sound. He said, I want you to get good at one side before you do the other. And people who try to do both at the same time end up being bad at both. And the student said, but coach, what if I just do double the amount of reps? I'll come in after class and I'll do the exact same thing that I did during class on the one side and I'll do it on the other. And then Sebastian said, well, if you do it, then that's fine. And then he watched the guy, and the student was coming in and putting in double the amount of work. So in that case, he's like, okay.
What can you say?
Right, what can you say? Because that addresses the why of his recommendation. Right. So I think that's really good. And then in relation to that other topic of when you disagree, if you're training hard enough to reach your goals, I would agree. I think probably 99% of the time the coach is right, 1% of the time the athlete is right. Because I think that there's a big athlete bias. I think there's two sort of misconceptions that occur commonly in an athlete's mind. The first misconception is that you have a best day bias, and you should because you're an athlete. And the best day bias is, every athlete has that day when they're in a flow state, everything's clicking, and they say, on that day, what can I do? And if you put that, on that day, you can't compare yourself in this scenario of that best day. And in MMA or striking, it's worse because you have the puncher's chance. So you say, man, it's my best day and I land the puncher's chance. Can I win the UFC title? You're like, everything clicks that day and a little bit of luck goes my way, I can win. But that's not the reality. The reality is, not only is there's best day and there's worst day, right? So a lot of times the coach is thinking about worst day and the athlete is thinking, but what if I go and have my best day? So that's one bias that I think the athlete has. The second misconception I think is